Get your hands off my flowers. I yelled so loud my throat burned, but the two men in bright yellow vests didn't even look up. Their shovels tore through the lavender like machetes, the sweet scent mixing with diesel fumes and fresh dirt. It was barely 7 in the morning, and the sun hadn't even cleared the roofs yet, but my garden, the one I'd spent 3 years building, was already half destroyed. I sprinted across the yard, barefoot, feeling the rough concrete scrape under my feet. One of them barked, "Ma'am, step back. We're authorized by the HOA." Authorized? I laughed. The kind of bitter, shaking laugh that comes when you can't believe what's happening. "Authorized to trespass on my property?" I shouted, grabbing at the edge of a planter before they could topple it. The man hesitated for half a second, just enough for me to see the sweat on his forehead and the guilt in his eyes. But the other one, a bigger guy with mirrored sunglasses, didn't flinch. He ripped up the last patch of lavender, roots snapping, petals scattering across the driveway like purple confetti at a funeral. Then she arrived. Gloria Henley, HOA president. 50-something, always in pastel pink like she was auditioning for a country club commercial. The kind of woman who wore perfume that smelled like disinfectant and smiled while ruining your life. She stepped out of her silver Lexus, clipboard in hand, her heels clicking on the sidewalk as if she owned the place. "Mr. Turner," she called, voice sugary and sharp. "This garden violates community standards. You were notified." I could barely form words. "Notified? You tore up my front yard without notice." I pointed to the heap of uprooted succulents, the cactus I'd grown from a cutting, the irrigation line now split and dripping into the dirt. "That's private property." Gloria tilted her head, unbothered. "Actually, the HOA governs all front-facing lawns as shared aesthetic property. It's in your covenant agreement." Her tone was rehearsed, legalistic, like she'd been waiting for this argument all week. I took a step forward, fists clenched, heart hammering in my chest. "This is my land, my soil. You don't get to tell me what grows on it." She just smiled, tight, condescending, and handed me a bright pink slip. "Non-compliance notice," she said. $4,000 in fines, due immediately. Every day you delay adds another 200. The landscapers climbed back into their truck, tires crushing broken petals as they left. I stood there, staring at the dirt that used to be alive, the air thick with dust and betrayal. Claire, my wife, opened the door behind me, her voice trembling. "Jack, what happened?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. The only sound was the wind scraping through the dead plants and the faint rustle of that pink slip in my hand. Ever had your HOA treat your home like it's theirs? Because that's exactly how it started, and I had no idea it was about to get so much worse. I slammed the violation letter against the kitchen counter so hard my coffee cup toppled, dark liquid splashing across the paper like blood. Claire jumped from her seat, startled. "Jack, what are you doing?" she gasped, but I was beyond calm. My hands trembled as I pointed to the words printed in smug bold font. "Failure to comply with HOA regulations will result in continued fines and legal action." "They destroyed my garden, Claire. My garden. And now they want $4,000 for it?" I shouted, pacing across the tile floor. The sun filtered weakly through the blinds, catching the steam from the spilled coffee like smoke from a fire I couldn't put out. Claire approached quietly, her robe still tied from the early morning chaos. She looked down at the letter, her brow furrowing. "Jack, they can't just take money from us without reason. There has to be something in the rules." That was the problem. There was something. I just hadn't seen it before. I yanked the thick HOA binder from the drawer, flipping through it until the pages fanned out like a deck of punishment. "Here," I growled, tapping a section underlined in faded yellow. Article 4, Community Appearance. "Listen to this. All lawns and front-facing properties must maintain uniform aesthetic cohesion consistent with neighborhood standards." Claire read it twice, then looked up. "That doesn't even mean anything." "Exactly," I snapped. "It's vague on purpose. It gives them power to decide what looks right and what doesn't." She sat down, rubbing her temples. Jack, I don't want to lose the house over this. You know how they get. They find, then they lean, and then they sue. Her voice cracked, soft but afraid. I softened a little. She wasn't wrong. I'd heard stories, neighbors losing their homes over mailbox paint colors or garden gnomes. But this was different. This wasn't about a decoration. It was about my right to not waste water on fake grass in a drought state. Claire, listen, I said, calmer now. In Arizona, Nevada, and California, people have fought HOAs over xeriscaping. Some states even have laws that protect homeowners who replace grass with native plants. They can't ban you for conserving water. We just need to find out if that applies here. Her eyes searched mine, desperate for reassurance. And if it doesn't? I took a long breath, staring out the kitchen window at the patch of dirt where life used to grow. Then we make it apply, I said. They think they can bully us with fines and fake rules, but I'm not paying a dime for their mistake. Claire reached out, squeezing my hand. Just promise me you'll be careful. Before I could answer, there was a sharp knock on the door. Deliberate, heavy, official. I turned toward it, dread crawling up my spine. On the porch lay another envelope, red stamped across the top. Failure to comply will result in lien proceedings. Order! Order! Gloria's voice cracked like a whip across the crowded community hall, her pearl bracelet clinking as she slammed the gavel on the folding table. The sound echoed off the beige walls, cutting through the rising noise of angry homeowners. I sat halfway down the row, arms crossed, jaw tight. I'd come here expecting answers. Fairness, maybe even decency. Instead, it felt like walking into a circus run by a tyrant. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as neighbors argued about everything from parking spaces to the color of their mailboxes. Gloria sat at the front, flanked by her loyal board, 3 retirees who nodded whenever she spoke, as if hypnotized. Her smile was perfectly rehearsed, the kind politicians wear right before they stab you with a rulebook. When she finally looked my way, her tone changed, sweetened, sharpened. Mr. Turner, I see you're here to discuss your recent violation. I stood. Discuss? You mean the one where your workers trespassed onto my property and destroyed everything I planted? A murmur rolled through the room. Gloria didn't flinch. Our landscapers were following protocol. You were warned. Warned. I held up the pink slip like a flag of war. This was taped to my door after you bulldozed my yard. The board members exchanged glances but said nothing. One of them, a thin man in a golf shirt, cleared his throat. Rules are rules, Jack. Everyone signs the same covenant. That phrase, rules are rules, burned in my ears. Then how come you're not following your own? I shot back. The HOA bylaws say all meeting agendas must be posted 72 hours in advance. Funny, I didn't see this one announced anywhere. Gloria's smile flickered, just for a heartbeat. The board has the discretion to call emergency sessions when needed, she replied quickly. We operate under state HOA code. Which code? I asked. Because I checked, and there's no emergency clause for lawn aesthetics. The room went quiet. Even the fluorescent buzz seemed to fade. I could see the irritation twitching in the corner of her mouth. She adjusted her blazer, composed herself, and said smoothly, Mr. Turner, if you can't follow community standards, perhaps you chose the wrong community. There it was. The threat. The polite eviction notice wrapped in a smile. I looked around, expecting someone to speak up, but no one did. The same neighbors who once complimented my garden now stared at their phones or studied the floor. Fear does that. It silences good people. I gathered my papers and turned to leave. My pulse was pounding, my jaw locked so tight it hurt. As I reached the door, Gloria leaned close enough for me to smell her perfume, sharp and artificial. You'll regret challenging me, she whispered, her voice low and cold. And for the first time, I believe she meant it. I slammed the dusty folder onto the county clerk's desk so hard a puff of old paper dust rose into the air. Tell me who owns this soil, I demanded, voice echoing off the linoleum and glass. The clerk, A silver-haired man with half-moon glasses and the calm patience of someone who'd seen too many property disputes. Didn't even flinch. His name tag read Hank Willoughby, and he looked like he'd been working in this office since the Nixon years. "Well now," Hank said slowly, leaning back in his chair. "That's a mighty specific question, son. Most folks just want to know their property tax. I want to know who owns the dirt under my lawn," I said, sliding the HOA's notice across the counter. "Because some power-hungry woman just tore up my garden and says it's community property." Hank chuckled, the sound dry as the air outside. "HOA trouble, huh? You're not the first, and you won't be the last." He reached for the folder, his fingers steady despite his age. "Let's take a look at your deed." He led me through rows of metal filing cabinets that smelled like dust and history, stopping in front of one labeled Original Lot Records, 1970s. He pulled out a thick binder, flipped through faded documents, and tapped a page with his pen. "Here she is. Your parcel." The words blurred for a moment as I scanned the paper. It wasn't the HOA covenant. This was older, dated almost 30 years before the HOA ever existed. My heart kicked into a faster rhythm as I traced the language. Ownership of lot and soil beneath surface reserved to purchaser and heirs. "Wait," I said slowly, looking up. "You mean, this deed gives me ownership of the actual soil? Not just the structure?" Hank nodded. "Sure does. That's called a split estate. See, when developers subdivide land, they can separate surface rights from mineral or soil rights. Usually it's about oil or gas. But in your case, looks like your original developer sold the lots before the HOA even existed, which means the HOA doesn't own the ground." I finished for him, my voice low but electric. "They can make rules about the appearance, but not the earth itself." He gave a small grin. "Exactly. They can't touch what's below. Soil rights often survive HOA formation, especially if the deed predates their charter. You've got a legal leg to stand on, son." For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to victory pulse in my veins. All this time, they'd been stomping across my property like they ruled it, but legally, they were trespassing. The dirt under that destroyed lavender? It was mine, and always had been. I closed the folder carefully, holding it like a loaded weapon. "Gloria," I muttered, a slow grin spreading across my face. "You just lost your ground." I looked up, and there it was, a black drone hovering just above my property line, buzzing like an angry wasp. Its small red light blinked steadily, recording everything. My barren yard, the garden bed I'd refused to replace, even the hose coiled at my feet. I felt my stomach tighten. "Claire," I called out. "They've got a drone out here." She stepped onto the porch, her robe cinched tight, shielding her eyes from the glare. "You're kidding," she whispered. "Jack, they're filming us?" The drone tilted, almost mockingly, before zipping toward the street and disappearing over the roof of the neighbor's house. But it wasn't the only thing that showed up that day. When I walked to the mailbox an hour later, there were photos inside. Printed, glossy shots of my yard from above. Each one stamped with the HOA's logo and a short cold line. "Ongoing inspection. Violations documented." That was when I knew Gloria wasn't backing down. By noon, 2 HOA enforcers arrived. Not real officers, just middle-aged men in neon vests, tape measures hanging from their belts like badges of authority. They didn't knock. They just started measuring my property line, writing on clipboards as if the dirt itself could incriminate me. I walked straight up to them. "Can I help you gentlemen with something?" One of them didn't look up. "Routine inspection, sir." "Routine trespassing, you mean?" I shot back. "This is private property." He shrugged. "HOA rules allow us to verify compliance." Claire's voice trembled from the porch. "Jack, please." But I was done being polite. I grabbed my phone and started recording. "Under our state's one-party consent law, I can legally record this interaction," I said, making sure my voice carried. "You're being documented. Now step off my land." The men exchanged glances and backed away, muttering. The fear in Claire's eyes cut through my anger. "Jack, this is getting dangerous," she said. They're watching us like we're criminals. I know, I said quietly, and that's why I'm done playing defense. From that day on, I recorded everything. Every phone call, every inspection, every note they left on the door. I even set up a small camera on the window ledge facing the street. If Gloria wanted a war of evidence, she was going to get one. 2 days later, another envelope arrived. Thick, official-looking, sealed in red. Claire stood beside me as I tore it open. The words hit me like a gut punch. Final warning, property seizure initiated. I stared at the letter, the drone's faint buzzing still echoing in my memory. Gloria wasn't just trying to control me anymore. She was trying to take everything I had. And I wasn't about to let her win. "Ma'am, you just stepped on private property," my lawyer said coldly, holding up a folded document like it was a badge. Her voice sliced through the heavy morning air. Gloria froze mid-stride, one designer heel planted squarely in my front yard. "And this," my lawyer continued, waving the deed, "says you have no authority here." That was my first meeting with attorney Denise Hale, and I'll never forget it. She wasn't like the polite, buttoned-up lawyers you see in ads. Denise was sharp, fearless, and had the kind of calm that made other people nervous. She wore dark jeans, a navy blazer, and glasses that caught the sun just enough to make her eyes unreadable. When she arrived at my house that morning, she didn't waste time with pleasantries. She wanted evidence, paperwork, and a plan to bury the HOA's arrogance. Gloria, of course, didn't back down easily. "This is an HOA matter," she snapped. "We have every right to enforce our standards." Denise smiled the kind of smile that meant danger. "Not when your authority ends at the surface soil," she said smoothly. "My client owns what's beneath it, and according to county records, your HOA charter doesn't supersede that deed." Gloria's face tightened. For once, she had no comeback. She turned on her heel and stormed off, her perfume trailing behind her like retreat smoke. When she was gone, Denise laid out her files across my dining table, the same place where I'd once eaten dinner in peace before this war started. "Jack," she said, scanning the papers, "your case is solid. You have what's called retained soil rights. That means your ownership isn't limited to what's above ground. It includes the land beneath. And here's the kicker. The HOA can't enforce bylaws that exceed what's granted in the original deed. They've been trespassing, plain and simple." Hearing those words felt like breathing after drowning. For the first time in months, I felt the weight on my chest start to lift. "So what do we do?" I asked. Denise started scribbling notes. "We file a cease and desist for unauthorized entry. Then we document every act of harassment, drones, fake inspections, everything. If they so much as step on your soil again, we hit them with a trespass claim and a restraining order." I watched her work, methodical, confident, relentless. She didn't just believe I was right, she knew it. When she finally packed her folder, she gave me a look, part amusement, part fire. "Jack," she said, tucking the deed into her briefcase. "They've been standing on shaky ground for months." Then she leaned in slightly, her grin quick and dangerous. "We're about to pull the rug out." Literally. And in that moment, for the first time since the bulldozers came, I actually smiled. I yanked the last sprinkler head out of the dirt and hurled it over the fence. "Now it's my soil again," I muttered, wiping the sweat from my neck. The sun beat down hard, cooking the dry ground until it shimmered like glass. Every inch of that yard, once green, compliant, and community approved, was now bare, cracked, and defiant. No plastic grass, no manicured shrubs, just the raw desert earth I legally owned. Claire stood on the porch, hands on her hips, brow furrowed. "Jack, are you sure about this?" I looked back at her, the dry wind pushing dust against my jeans. "Absolutely," I said. "They want uniform lawns? They're not getting mine." Denise said the soil's mine, so that's exactly what I'm giving them. Soil. I spent the entire afternoon ripping out every trace of HOA-approved landscaping. The synthetic turf came up like skin peeling off a wound. The irrigation lines, the decorative stones, even the ridiculous approved mulch, all gone. I wanted Gloria to drive by and choke on her own rules when she saw it. By sunset, the front yard looked like a scene from an old western. Barren, sun-bleached, stubborn. That night, Claire and I sat at the table, exhausted. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. I smirked, sipping from my water bottle. "Now we wait." We didn't have to wait long. The next morning, Gloria's Lexus rolled up at 8 a.m. sharp. She stood on the sidewalk in her pastel power suit, staring at the yard like it was a personal insult. Two of her compliance officers flanked her, clipboards in hand. She didn't step onto the property this time. Not after Denise's cease and desist letter, but her voice carried. "Mr. Turner," she called out, "this property is in clear violation of Section 4A, Neighborhood Aesthetic Standards." I stepped out, still holding my coffee. "Then enforce it," I said simply. Her face went red. "We will," she snapped, waving to her men. "Photograph everything." Click, click, click. Cameras flashed as if I were standing in a crime scene. But legally, they couldn't touch a thing. Denise's letter had hit them hard. No HOA representative or contractor may enter or alter the property without owner consent. And consent was one thing they'd never get again. Over the next week, the letters came faster than junk mail. Notice of fine, $500. Notice of fine, $1,000. Final warning. Each one I stacked in a neat pile on my kitchen counter and ignored. The HOA could print all the paper they wanted. The law was on my side now. One afternoon, I found Gloria pacing at the edge of my driveway, her phone pressed to her ear. She was furious, red-faced and whispering into the receiver like someone trying not to scream. I didn't need to hear her words to know what she was saying. She was losing control. Claire watched through the blinds. "She's not going to let this go," she said softly. "I don't want her to," I replied. "The more she fights, the harder she falls." That evening, I got the letter I'd been expecting. It was thicker than usual, with an embossed seal and an official tone that sent a chill down my spine. Across the top in bold letters, "Emergency injunction filed, court hearing scheduled." I held it up for Claire to see. She covered her mouth, whispering, "Jack, what are they trying to do?" I smiled, though my pulse raced. "They're trying to take me to court." I looked out at the cracked earth glinting in the fading light. "Good," I said, "because that's where I'm going to bury them." "Objection!" I shouted, slamming my fist against the oak table so hard the bench vibrated beneath me and a hush fell over the courtroom. Gloria's lawyer blinked like a man caught mid-lie. The room smelled faintly of old coffee and polished wood, and for a second I felt like the center of a storm. I hadn't planned on theatrics, but months of being bullied, filmed, and fined had thinned my patience to a wire. Watching that man twist the truth into neat little legal knots made my blood boil, and suddenly the only thing I wanted was for everyone in that room to see what they had done to my life. Denise Hale didn't flinch when I yelled. She stood up, composed, and walked to the bench like a woman delivering a verdict of her own. Her voice was cool and exact as she laid the deed down in front of the judge, the paper's edges catching the light. "Your Honor, the county recorder's office shows retained soil rights for my client dating decades prior to the HOA's charter," she said, sliding the deed toward the bench. "The HOA's enforcement actions constitute trespass and harassment." Gloria's lawyer opened his mouth, all smooth suit, and practiced outrage. "Your Honor, the covenant gives the HOA broad discretion over community appearance. The board acted in good faith to maintain neighborhood standards." He looked at me as if I were a nuisance to be swatted away, like a lawn weed. The judge, a compact man with tired eyes, tapped his pen and peered at the deed, his face unreadable. I watched Denise methodically dismantle his argument. She pointed out dates, signatures, and the simple law of the land fact no amount of HOA bravado could erase. Original recorded deeds that grant property rights take precedence over later created association bylaws when there's a conflict. "Deeds are foundational property documents," she told the court. "They are recorded, they are public, and they define ownership. An HOA cannot enforce a bylaw that exceeds the property rights granted in the original deed." The law nugget landed in the room like a weighty fact, deeds supersede HOA bylaws under property law. The opposition tried to paint my actions as intransigent, a homeowner refusing reasonable community standards, but Denise had anticipated every line. She played the videos I'd recorded, drones, hovering, compliance officers measuring my soil, Gloria's crew ripping out lavender at dawn. The footage rolled across the projector, and you could hear a pin drop as the images of my ruined garden flickered across the wall. The jurors weren't jury members. This was a bench ruling, but the judge's eyes softened as he watched the petals, the dirt, the water line I had ripped from the ground. When Denise rose for her closing, she didn't beg. She stated the obvious. This isn't about grass colors or neighborly tastes. This is about a corporation trying to exercise authority it never lawfully possessed. The soil doesn't belong to them, Your Honor. It belongs to Mr. Turner. Her voice had an edge I'd never heard before, less lawyer, more sentry. The judge folded his hands, cleared his throat, and read aloud from the deed and the county code, then delivered a ruling that felt like an exhale after a long hold. He denied the HOA's emergency injunction, found that the association had overstepped its authority, and ordered the HOA to immediately cease trespassing and to remove all fines related to the incident. He even assessed nominal damages for harassment, a public slap that would cost them more than pride. I felt something loosen inside me. Relief, yes, but something sharper, a vindication that tasted almost dangerous. Gloria's face paled and then pinched into something I recognized. Fury. As we gathered our papers, cameras from the local news crew at the back of the room whispered like birds. Gloria leaned forward, her voice a poisonous hiss barely audible over the hum. "You'll pay for this," she breathed. "Is it true, Jack? She's been lying to all of us?" My neighbor Travis yelled from across the street, waving a folded newspaper like it was on fire. His voice carried down the cul-de-sac, waking dogs and curiosity alike. I stepped off my porch, still clutching my morning coffee, and saw what was splashed across the front page in bold black letters: HOA President under investigation for financial misconduct. There it was, Gloria Henley's smiling headshot beside a list of words that must have been her personal nightmare. Fraud, embezzlement, and falsified records. Beneath that, a paragraph detailing years of missing maintenance funds, inflated landscaping contracts, and thousands of dollars of miscellaneous community expenses that seemed to have vanished straight into her bank account. I took the paper from Travis and scanned it, my pulse racing. "It's real," I said, almost in disbelief. The state audits confirmed it. She used HOA money to fund her own projects, vacations, even private security for her house. Travis shook his head. "Man, we trusted her. She said all those fines were for the Community Reserve Fund. Guess that meant her retirement." Within hours, the whole neighborhood was buzzing. Groups gathered in driveways and cul-de-sacs, waving copies of the article like protest signs. Even the people who'd once sided with Gloria were furious now. I saw Denise's car pull up. She'd known this was coming. "You lit the match, Jack," she said quietly, stepping out. "Now the fire's spreading." We held an emergency meeting that evening, not at the HOA hall. Gloria had sealed herself off in there, but at my house. Folding chairs filled the yard where my lavender once grew, now bare but proud. Travis, Sarah from 2 houses down, old Mr. Klein from the corner. They all came. I stood at the front, holding a copy of the bylaws I'd once hated to read. "Folks," I said, voice steady despite the adrenaline, "for years we've been paying into something we didn't control. We were told it was for landscaping, community upkeep, neighborhood harmony. But that's not what happened. Gloria misused our dues. And under state law, misappropriating HOA funds isn't just unethical. It's criminal." Denise stepped forward, her tone crisp. "She's violated several state codes. Misusing HOA funds can trigger a mandatory state audit, and if the money was taken under false pretenses, it can escalate into federal charges. You don't just get fined for that. You can go to prison." A murmur rolled through the crowd, anger mixing with disbelief. Someone shouted, "So what do we do now?" "We take back our neighborhood," I said. We petitioned to dissolve the HOA entirely. For the first time, there was unity, not fear, not silence, but resolve. People began signing the petition right there, pens scratching in the fading light. Even those who had once whispered behind my back about my ugly yard were now shaking my hand. By the next morning, word had spread further than our little street. Local news vans parked along the curb, reporters talking about the HOA rebellion. And then, as if the day needed punctuation, the sound of sirens broke the morning calm. Claire came running out onto the porch, eyes wide. "Jack, look!" Down the street, black SUVs with FBI stenciled on the sides rolled to a stop in front of the HOA office. Agents stepped out, jackets flapping in the wind, badges gleaming in the sunlight. For the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't feel small under their power. Gloria had built her empire on control, and now it was being raided, piece by piece. I drove the first shovel into the dirt and felt the handle vibrate through my palms. "Let's bring it back, Claire," I said quietly. The soil gave way, dry and sun-baked, but it was ours again. Legally, spiritually, and stubbornly ours. Claire knelt beside me, her gloves already covered in dust, and together we began the slow, steady work of rebuilding what Gloria had destroyed. It had been 3 weeks since the FBI cars rolled down our street, and the silence that followed was the kind of peace you could feel in your bones. No more drones, no more pink slips. The HOA office stood empty, its doors sealed and lights out. Gloria's name had become shorthand for corruption, a lesson the whole town wouldn't soon forget. Claire handed me a small tray of native seedlings: sage, prickly pear, desert marigold, and milkweed. "You sure these will take?" she asked, eyeing the cracked soil. "They'll do more than take," I said, pressing one into the ground. "They'll thrive, just like we did." We worked in silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of shovels and the occasional hum of a bee the only soundtrack. When I looked up, I saw Travis and his wife across the street, watching from their porch. Then, without a word, Travis picked up his own shovel and crossed over. "Figured if you're going native," he said, grinning, "we might as well too." By the end of the week, the entire block had joined in. Lawns that once looked identical, sterile green carpets approved by the HOA, began transforming into living, breathing desert art. Wildflowers, succulents, and gravel paths took over where conformity used to reign. The hum of lawnmowers was replaced by the soft buzz of bees and the trickle of drip irrigation lines. The neighborhood that Gloria tried to control was finally growing free. Claire turned up the radio one morning as we worked, a country song drifting through the open windows. She danced barefoot in the dirt while I laughed, wiping sweat from my brow. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't dared to feel. Joy. Not relief, not vindication, just pure, unfiltered joy. As the weeks passed, our garden came alive again. The smell of sage filled the air at dusk, and when the desert wind blew, it carried that clean, earthy scent through the entire street. Birds returned. Even the old mailman stopped to say how much better things looked. It wasn't just landscaping anymore. It was a statement. A victory planted root by root. And as for Gloria, her house sat dark and empty. The once pristine lawn she'd bragged about had turned brown, untended, almost poetic in its decay. Every time I passed by, I thought about how control had been her obsession, and the very thing that destroyed her. One evening, as Claire and I sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the hills, the mail truck pulled up. The driver handed me a thick certified letter, stamped from another city. I signed for it, the envelope crisp and heavy in my hands. Claire raised an eyebrow. "What now? Another fine?" I tore it open slowly, scanning the letterhead, and felt my pulse quicken. It wasn't a fine. It was a plea. "Dear Mr. Turner," it began, "we've heard about your case. Our HOA has started similar harassment. We need your help." I looked up at Claire, half in disbelief, half in recognition of what was coming next. She smiled knowingly. "Guess the fight's not over, huh?" I grinned, folding the letter. "No," I said. It's just moving down the street. You fought dirt and lost, I said quietly, standing in the same spot where Gloria once screamed at me about community standards. Now there was nothing left of her legacy but silence and the faint smell of desert sage floating through the breeze. Her pastel-painted mailbox leaned crooked, the lawn brown and brittle under the heat. Time had done what justice started. It erased her control. I kicked at the ground lightly with my boot. The soil was firm but alive, pulsing with quiet resilience. That same soil she'd called community property now held 1,000 stories. Mine, Claire's, and every neighbor who had finally remembered what ownership meant. I closed my eyes and let the wind hit my face. The sound of bees carried from my yard, mixing with the faint creak of a flag on Travis's porch. People always say freedom's about big things, rights, money, government. But for me, it came down to something smaller, something older. Soil. That patch of earth outside your door that no one should ever be able to dictate. I used to take it for granted. I thought owning a home meant owning everything on it. I was wrong. HOAs, developers, and paper laws can twist ownership into something unrecognizable if you're not careful. That was my first real lesson. Always verify your deed before you obey someone else's bylaws. What's on record at the county office matters more than what's printed in a community handbook. My land wasn't just a lot number. It was a line of legal history written decades before anyone thought to invent a homeowners association. And because of that, because I took the time to dig, I found something the HOA couldn't touch. It wasn't just about soil rights. It was about principle. Every fine, every threat, every pink slip Gloria shoved in my face was built on intimidation, not law. And when law finally showed up, she crumbled. That's what happens when power meets truth. After the case, I spent a lot of time reflecting on why it mattered so much to me. It wasn't just pride or spite. It was legacy. My father was a veteran, a man who believed the ground you stand on is sacred if you've earned it. He used to tell me, "Jack, a man without land is a man without voice." I didn't understand that when I was a kid, but now I knew exactly what he meant. The garden that grew back on this soil wasn't just green, it was symbolic. Every new plant was a piece of defiance. The lavender returned, fuller and richer than before, bees circling it like loyal guards. The cactus bloomed again, stubborn and unapologetic. Claire and I would sit on the porch every evening, watching the lights stretch across the desert, feeling that rare kind of peace you only get after surviving a storm. Neighbors still stop by, sometimes just to talk. A few even bring paperwork, asking me how to check their deeds, what to do if their HOA oversteps. Denise still answers my calls when I need legal clarity, though these days she calls me Professor Turner. The irony isn't lost on either of us. It's strange, I didn't set out to lead anything. I just wanted to plant a garden. But somewhere along the way, that garden turned into a movement. People started calling it the soil rights case. Articles ran in neighboring counties. A few other homeowners used my case as precedent to challenge their own HOAs. And maybe that's what victory really looks like. Not in the courtroom, but in the quiet after, when people start to believe they can fight back too. As I stood there, watching the sunset glow across the horizon, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Jack Turner?" a voice said, shaky but determined. "Yeah, that's me." "My name's Mark Keller," the man said. "You don't know me, but I saw your story in the paper. My HOA's doing something worse. They've fenced off my driveway. They're saying it's community access. You won't believe what they've done." I exhaled slowly, looking down at the soil beneath my feet. That stubborn, beautiful soil that had once been a battlefield. "Try me," I said, and as the sun disappeared behind the ridge, I knew this wasn't the end of my fight. It was just the next chapter, and the ground beneath me was ready. They banned my garden, but I owned the dirt, and that's where I buried their rules. That's the line I used when a reporter asked how it felt to beat the HOA that tried to bulldoze my life. I said it half joking, but the truth in it ran deep. They thought they could bury me in fines, threats, and paperwork. Instead, I grew roots that spread far beyond this street. In the months that followed the trial, something unexpected happened. People started showing up at my door. Some drove from 3 towns over, carrying thick binders of HOA notices and desperation in their eyes. Others wrote letters, sharing their own horror stories. A veteran fined for hanging an American flag. A single mom threatened for painting her door the wrong shade of blue. A retired couple told to cut down a decades-old oak tree. I couldn't turn them away. So with Denise's help, I started something small but powerful, the Soil Rights Network. It began as a few neighbors gathering around my dining table, passing coffee and stories, but it grew fast. Within weeks, there were meetings across the county. We taught homeowners how to pull their deeds, how to understand their covenants, and most importantly, how to fight back, legally, peacefully, and fearlessly. Claire designed the logo, a single sprouting seed growing through a crack in concrete. It's about more than soil, she said. It's about resilience. And she was right. The HOA world had been built on silence and fear. But now, people were talking, sharing, standing up. What once felt like a personal war had become a collective movement. I wasn't just a homeowner with a garden anymore. I was a man who had proved that even dirt could rise up against power. Every time I drove through the neighborhood now, it looked different. The lawns weren't uniform anymore. Some were native gardens, some wildflower patches, some gravel and cacti. It wasn't perfect, but it was free. Gloria's old house had finally sold, though I heard the new owner refused to join any HOA again. Can't say I blamed him. Sometimes at night, I sit on the porch with Claire, the scent of lavender in the air, the same plant that started all of this. The stars stretch wide over the desert, and the world feels still for a moment. That's when I realize they never really took anything from me. They just reminded me what was worth defending. They wanted conformity, I say, looking at the garden alive with color and sound. But I grew freedom. They tried to bury me under rules and fear, but I fought back and proved that even dirt can win. If you've ever been bullied by an HOA, if they've threatened your home, your peace, or your freedom, this story was for you. Drop your own HOA nightmare in the comments. I read every single one. Smash that like if you'd stand your ground too. And subscribe, because the next battle's even bigger. The fight for homeowners' rights isn't over. It's just getting started, right here.